Real people, real opinions, Real Talk Radio. The multi-award winning Niall Boylan Show.
Ireland's classic hits.
A new campaign in the UK called Not My Shame, or hashtag Not My Shame, you can look it up on Twitter if you want, or Facebook, is hoping to turn the tables on the shame that can often, sadly, accompany the conversation of child sexual abuse. Now, this is quite a heavy topic, but a very important topic, and we could never cover it without the generosity of those who have survived this horrific abuse and their willingness to share and advocate for others. Tonight, we will talk to one such survivor. Emma Jane Taylor is the founder of the charity project 9010. She is a campaigner and creator of Not My Shame, the movement, and a successful thought leader, educator, and author of Don't Hold Back. In 2022, she published The Real Silence, a magazine focused on sharing the hidden views of child sexual abuse, the first magazine in the UK offering news in that particular way. And as I mentioned, she herself is a surviving child sexual abuse. She is currently travelling the world, focusing on empowering other survivors, and she joins me on the line now to talk about her campaign. Good evening to Jane. How are you?
Hi, Niall. I am good. Thank you very much. Thank you for having me on tonight to talk about this.
I'm sorry we had a few technical issues getting you there. I think the lightning in the area is playing havoc with all our technology tonight, but hopefully we have it all sorted out. But look, I mean, it's an interesting idea of, I suppose, not my shame. In other words, it's, trying to take that stigma away from being a survivor of sexual abuse. I mean, so when did it start for you, by the way?
Niall, I've been sort of thinking about this as I've been doing this campaign, and it was around sort of like 3 years ago. I mean, I've been in and out of therapy for many years, and then about 2 or 3 years ago, I was working in this space, and a lot of the work that I do sort of around the media, and there's always the news about the perpetrators. We're always hearing about what they're doing, and I just thought, I'm sick of this. I am so sick of this. We don't focus enough on survivors of child sexual abuse. They are constantly triggered by news items, media, sensationalized stories, and they shouldn't be, because it really isn't their shame and silence. And, there they are really struggling in silence. Yeah. And I thought, what, I'm sick of it. I've had enough, because it's not my shame. It's not their shame. And so I said it out loud, and I was like, whoa, that's quite empowering to be able to say that, because it really...
Do you know what? It feels good to talk about things, doesn't it? It feels good really sometimes when you get things out. Yeah.
Totally. And, you kind of go, it's not my secrecy. It's not my thing. It's the perpetrator's silence and secrecy. But for all those years, we were led to believe it was ours, and that we'd done something wrong and we should keep it quiet. And I thought, you know what? I'm done with that. I started stepping forward. I put the quote out like 18 months ago, maybe 2 years, and then I put it out again last year. And I thought, right, I'm going to put it on a T-shirt now, and I'm just going to put it out there. And it's been, I can't tell you, it's so overwhelming. The amount of people that have come forward to say, actually, EJ, can I wear a T-shirt? Can I get one? And so I got a couple made for some people, and then a few others were like, actually, and I thought, I can't do this on my own. I'm going to have to really sort of think quickly on my feet.
You need to expand the business here, so to speak. Yes. Yeah.
And so I set up this shop, and it's now selling in America, Australia, Dubai, Canada, Europe, UK, South Africa.
You know what? It's making something very positive out of something very negative in your life. Which in turn is, as you rightly said, empowers you to do that. I mean, it's really empowering, isn't it? And I was really talking to Jane. We were talking about you coming on earlier on. My producer Jane, myself, and we were talking about different things. And I was born in a mother and baby home, and I remember I was talking to her about before my mother died, and she told me certain things that I didn't know about her and my father. And I said, and I was talking to Jane, and while I was talking to Jane about it, it felt good to talk about things like that, because you kind of keep them to yourself. I said to Jane, I'm a great person for bad things or negative things that have happened in my life. I put them in the back of my mind. And every now and again, you kind of take it out and feel sad and then just put it back in again. But it's good to get it right out there and just say it as it is, because it makes you feel so much better.
It does. And I spend a lot of time over my years going, I need to focus positively on situations. So I try to focus on anything that comes in that's slightly negative. How can I make that positive? How can I learn? How can that become a constructive conversation? I've spent so many times in that dark, bitter, horrible space of, blame and negativity and secrecy, and I'm done with it. I was listening to your listener. I was a drinker, I was a drug user, I was an addict, I was because that was my coping mechanisms until I was 23, and I decided to stop that, going to therapy. I'm 50 now. I haven't touched a drop of alcohol or taken anything illegal since, and I think that was like my journey. I never thought I'd be here, Niall. I had nothing, I had just wanted to feel better in my life. And
I think that's what I said to James before you come on. I think we all just want to feel better because, as I said to James, he's a wonderful man. He's now in recovery. He's turned his life around. He's got a job. And I said, we only get one life. And
Absolutely.
I suppose, if sadly you've been the victim of sexual abuse or you're an alcoholic or you're a gambler or whatever it is you've had in your life, and that's turned your life upside down, you then have to start thinking to yourself, I'm only getting one shot at this. When I die or the day before I die, am I going to look back and say, I should have had a more positive outlook because now I'm going and I'm not getting another go at it. So is that really what it's about?
I remember someone saying to me many years ago, don't get to the end of your life having regrets. And I thought, actually, do you know what, that's been quite a powerful thing for me. And my stepfather says never get complacent in life. And I think those two things have been really powerful. And so with this campaign now, it's being able to give other people that opportunity. Maybe people who had kind of been stuck in that, what do I do next? How do I get out of this? Can actually go, right, okay, look, I'm going to just put it out there. It's not my shame. And that will help me and empower me to feel better about myself, and they'll start taking their steps forward to heal. And so it's closing that gap of pain, right? If we can close that down and give someone the encouragement to remind to know that this wasn't their fault, they've done nothing wrong, they were a child, and they can start having a different thought. It's putting that, it's just dropping that stone in the pond, and it's a ripple, isn't it? And people start going, actually, that's a different thought process, and I hadn't had that previously. And it might not be.
We've seen it with many movements in the past, including Me Too and other movements like that. When somebody comes out and owns what happens to them, and I know some of the merchandise you sell, for example, one of them says, "I'm not afraid to say I was sexually abused as a child. It's not my shame." But it's the same as any other kind of movement that we've seen in relation to people, who've had bad experiences in life. When you come out and say it, other people then go, but you know what? That happened to me too. Let me share my experience. And that happened to me. And it's great to see that, because then I'm not on my own.
Yes. And that's nothing, that's such a no truer word spoken there. And the amount of people that have been coming forward to me, who were anyway, because of the world that I live in, but now it's gone spectacularly big. And I'm really blessed because there's a lot of people around the campaign who've joined me. They're in a picture, a collage. I know some of them are listening tonight, so a big shout out to them. And I know you've
got a few UK soap stars and pop stars and journalists.
Soap stars and pop stars and journalists. I was at an event with Michael Parkinson, and I had the T-shirt on it. We were about to have a picture. And I said, look, do you want me to cover up my T-shirt? He said, no, I support you. Leave it open. And
well done.
I thought, what a legend. I mean, he was always a legend. And now he was like, and he said, look, if I can do anything to support, that would be it. So, so I've had a really big response already, and more people are coming forward all the time to support me with this. So, it's been great. I've got Matt Hoy, of course, who was in UB40. And so journalist Sonia Poulton. I've got some soap stars. They haven't come out yet. They're just about to. So I'll be launching that over the next couple of weeks. And of course, obviously, all the people on the collage who are superstars. They're rock stars to me, because they are the voices that can help so many other people. And just tonight, some of them are in. There's someone in Sydney. There's someone in USA listening. There's so many people are really wanting this to be something in their life as well, and for that I will be grateful.
Think it's wonderful. I think it's a wonderful idea, and it reminds me, you mentioned soaps there a few minutes ago. I'm a bit of a secret fan. I shouldn't say this out loud. I'm a secret fan of Coronation Street. Anyway,
more recently, you might be lucky then when this comes out.
More recently, there's been a storyline in Coronation Street. There's been two storylines. One about a stalker stalking Daisy in the bar, but the other one was about Amy, who was sexually abused and raped. And wouldn't it be wonderful on the show if they could get Amy, who now has to accept the fact that the guy that raped her is going to get away with it because she doesn't have any evidence. But it wouldn't it be wonderful to have her wear it on the show, because I just think that would bring so many people out, you know, to have something like that happen. I think it's great.
Let's put it out
think
there.
this applies.
Amy from Coronation Street.
I think it applies to everybody and to every situation that people find themselves in. Recently, we had, on the radio station here, we had a bullying campaign for people who are bullied as children or bullied in the workplace. And the amount of people that came out, and grown men and women crying on the air, but really happy that they were allowed to tell their story. They probably were afraid to tell that story before. And Ireland, of course, as you know, has a very dark history of sexual abuse when it comes to religious orders and things like that as well. So we have a dark history there. And I think it's really important for people to tell their stories, and really important for people to face up to it and understand that there's no shame. The idea, when we see these, you know, these perpetrators, you know, be it a priest here in Ireland or whatever it is, being marched into a courtroom and glorified on television, and we see the court cases and all this kind of thing, and their names are mentioned all the time, and I understand the name of the victim sometimes is not mentioned to protect their anonymity, but in saying that, you know, we only ever hear about the perpetrators. We tend to forget about the victims.
And that's what I got totally fed up with, Niall. You know, I was reading, there was an article on Maxwell, and she was talking from her prison cell about her relationship with Prince Andrew. And I was just like, why is she being given columns in the national press? I mean, you know, what she's done, what she's been aligned with the Epstein. Why is she being...
going around and procuring young girls for him,
Absolutely. And so now that she's being sensationalised, she's in the national press. You've got the Epsteins, you've got the Savills, you've got the Rolf Harris. I mean, we don't know. If they've done the crime, put them away, in my opinion, for the rest of their life. Don't let them out. And that's it. Let's not hear any more about them. Let's not make it a news story. But, of course, that becomes a news story later on because of, you know, something might happen or they have a relationship with someone. But why? I mean, just why? When you think about the devastation that's been done to a survivor's life because of a perpetrator, and in these instances, you've got high-profile perpetrators. The survivors who are keeping anonymous for obvious reasons, there'll be people triggered around them. It's like dominoes. Even people who haven't been associated with that case will be triggered because of the news, because of, you know, the sensationalized story, and without a lot of care and consideration to the survivors. And we need to turn that around. And that's what this is doing. It's turning it around, going, look, hey, this isn't our shame. Let's make it about the survivors. Look at what they've gone through, learn from them. Maybe you can find some education to help prevent child sexual abuse from happening. Otherwise, we're just going around in circles, Niall, and we need to break it. And so by putting this campaign out, we're going, right, we're stamping down now. We're putting our mark on this conversation, getting it out there. And being, you know, the chink in that cog, and just saying,
is there still a stigma? I mean, when you look back many years ago, you know, people who were victims of sexual abuse, they didn't open their mouths because for some reason, society, well, particularly here in Ireland, a very conservative society, they were led to believe they kind of deserved it. That all changed, thankfully, and we now understand what happened, or have a better understanding of what happened to both boys and girls going back in those days. Do you think that the stigma is is there still a stigma to being an abuse survivor?
I think so, absolutely. And I think it also depends on what stage you are in your... I called it my recovery years because that's what I kind of felt that I had to go through. So when you look at me at 23, and, you know, you bear in mind that our brains haven't really developed until late 20s, sometimes, you know, closer to your 30s. You're starting to understand stuff that you might not have understood as a teenager, early 20s. You know, I was a late developer because of what I'd gone through with my own story. So I was around 23, 24 when the penny started to drop by the severity of what had happened to me. I then was able to go into therapy. I stopped drinking and doing everything else. Now, my therapy at that point, from sort of 23 into my 30s, it wasn't every week, but it was consistent throughout that time. I never thought about speaking up because it was embarrassing. I was mortified that had happened to me. I felt dirty. I felt like just ashamed of myself. And so, you know, I go 30s into 40s, and you're starting to sort of get a bit stronger because of the story. And then it was in my 40s when I started speaking out. I was 45 when I started speaking out, 44, 45 when I started speaking out for the first time. I would never have considered doing that in my 20s, 30s, because my mindset was in a much, I was underdeveloped, my maturity, I was probably going through all sorts of complications
And not
with
only that,
PTSD and
society,
shock.
but society changed around you as well.
It did. And of course, you had the Me Too, when I was a 1972 baby, so when I got to the sort of 80s, 90s, these things just weren't talked about, and they are talked about more, but they're still an embarrassment for people to talk about. But they are. I think we're moving forward. Yes, we're absolutely moving forward. Are we moving forward as fast as people would like? No. You probably face it more with these conversations because of the work that you do on the radio. But as a whole, most people just don't really want to have these conversations unless they are a survivor or they know someone who has gone through this trauma. Other than that, they don't want to know that it's even happening, so they won't entertain a conversation. And they're the people we need to reach.
And I know you're also an educator and you're also an author. You have a book out called Don't Hold Back. But do you ever talk to parents of children who have been abused, for example, or have you ever talked to the guardians of these children on how to help those children if I suppose they come out early in life?
Yeah, and I think through my work on social media, you are reaching people without realising you're reaching people, because I do a lot of sort of blogging and put things out there and challenging questions and conversations. So you are having that conversations without knowing you're having them. A lot of people don't want to be public about it. Yes, so I directly, if a family comes to me to mentor their child who's gone through abuse, I'm not a counsellor, I'm not a therapist, I'm a mentor. I then speak to the parents about how they can support their child. And they obviously have advice with their therapists and counsellors. As for speaking to parents about how to prevent child sexual abuse, social media, the work that I'm doing, I go into schools occasionally, and obviously I've got the charity which will be looking at doing lots of safeguarding with young people, safeguarding teens and parents. But it's very hard, if I was to say, look, next week I'm going to be in London doing a talk for parents about how to prevent child sexual abuse. People don't even really want to talk about that. It's quite dark. It's quite, it's quite a sinister. It's not a night. It's not a night out, is it? I mean, it's not that's not a great night out. It's not like going to
the cinema or the theatre.
Yeah,
really, no.
But it's an important night out, and that's why I think I'd love to see the movement move forward so that we can have these nights where we go, look, let's just have an open conversation. What can you do? How can you talk to your child? How can you put, boundaries in place to protect your child? What's your child's knowledge around? And I think the knowledge...
It's not even the conversation. It's the way we have the conversation has changed. And that's what you're changing. It's the way the conversation is had. Because
the way
you're right.
we're having a conversation.
It can be very dull, it can be very dark, it can be very sinister and sound quite horrible and put people off talking about it. But if you're talking about it in a more open fashion, and I'm not going to say blasé or disposable fashion, but certainly if you talk about it in a way that people are more understanding, I think more people will come out.
Oh, absolutely. And I see that all the time. And actually, some of the people on the collage, I don't know if you've seen the collage, it's got, about 30 people on there now who wanted to be in the collage with me wearing their T-shirt. Now, some of them they bought the T-shirt like 4 weeks ago. It's taken them 4 weeks to have their picture taken to put on it. And I'm like, look, there's absolutely no rush.
No pressure. There's no pressure.
No pressure. And actually, some people, I'm like, just if you don't want to wear it, don't. Just have it close to you, because that's empowering enough. And there are some more palatable items on the website for people if they want to wear more subtle things. So, but it is encouraging people. People are getting more confident. Once you put that message out the first time, it's a bit like, oh, holy crap, what have I done? But it's out there, and people can start to talk to you. And it does change conversations within your own personal life, because you're going to open up potential complications with your own personal network around
What do you
this
say, by the way?
conversation.
Sorry, here's just a question. Let's say you know somebody years, maybe you work with them, or they're just a colleague or a friend, and they turn around to you, and let's say, oh gosh, well, you listened to Niall Boylan last night, he was talking to that girl, Jane, and they were talking about child sexual abuse.
Emma Jane.
Sorry, I do apologise. Sorry, Emma Jane. I do apologise, but the person turns around and says, I was sexually abused as a child. What advice would you give to the colleague on how to deal with that conversation when somebody comes out to them, so to speak, about being sexually abused? Because that's a difficult thing. How do you react to that, when somebody says that to you?
Well, first of
Condolences,
all,
I'm sorry, or...
I would believe them straight away. I would be empathetic. I would listen, and I'd be non-judgmental, because it's such a sensitive subject. You don't want to trigger someone by something that you could say that could, you might think you're giving good advice, but when you're dealing with this kind of complex conversation, don't give advice. Just listen. Just be empathetic and believe. Survivors being believed is a really important part of this conversation. Now, no one is going to harbour that secret for years and go through all this stress and turbulence to come out and just say something flippantly. This is serious. And so we need to be empathetic, we need to listen, we need to have non-judgmental conversations. And I would always look, what can I do to help? Can I signpost you to someone, who could speak to you further, maybe a professional? Is that, how can I help you? And it might not be that they want you to offer help, get any help from you. They might just want someone to listen. And that's a big step on itself. And it's quite scary. What
I'm thinking too is when I'm looking at the website and I'm looking at things as subtle as, I say, a phone case, that will have the words on it. Rather than somebody, if they don't want to verbally say anything, say they're in the workplace or they're with colleagues or friends, to have that is enough for somebody to maybe ask them the question if they see it. You know what I mean? And do you understand what I'm trying to say here? That, rather than coming out and saying it to somebody, if you have a mug or a phone case or something even subtle, like the water bottle, for example, that I see there. I mean, that would then encourage people to maybe inquire and say, oh, I noticed your mug. Or, I'm very sorry to hear you were sexually abused. Or, and it kind of brings out the conversation rather than somebody having to announce it.
Yeah, and that's why I've made a lot of that. So we've got the in-the-face merchandise, which is obviously hard-hitting. I'm not ashamed to say I was sexually abused as a child. We've also got the more palatable merchandise for exactly that, with a little hashtag not my shame or not their shame, which is obviously what our allies are wearing. And we're getting a load of allies. Thank you, allies, we need you. But the not my shame merchandise is really important, just a simple hashtag, because it can open up that conversation. But of course, I also think no one's going to buy that, even the more palatable ones, unless they're ready to sort of have those, embryonic conversations, or, because it is such a difficult conversation. This is so complex, so deep, and the trauma that will have been going through that person from a child through to adult is something that not many people can get close to. I mean, survivors have an understanding of survivors, but every story is different. So you can't ever really fully appreciate what everyone's going through. You just got to keep listening. If you see someone with not my shame, you'll know straight away that could be a conversation if you understand what that hashtag means. Approach it very sensitively and delicately, because you don't want to then re-trigger that person and send them into a spiral of darkness.
Well, look, it's a wonderful idea. I think it's a wonderful concept. I think it's a wonderful movement. And if people want to get involved, and maybe you've been down that road, and unfortunately Ireland has its fair share of victims and survivors in this country.
Yeah.
EmmaJaneTaylor.com. It's EmmaJaneTaylor.com. And there's a lot of great information in the community there as well as the merchandise as well, and books to get for information and help for people and support for people. Emma, it's been wonderful talking to you. And I have to say it's quite enlightening, quite empowering for a lot of women maybe listening as well, and men who may have been sexually abused. Thank you very much indeed, and I appreciate you coming on the air tonight.
Thank you, Niall.
There you go. EmmaJaneTaylor.com is the website if you want to go. Not my shame. And she's right. Don't be carrying it around like baggage. Let it out. The more people that know, the more people you talk to, I think the better you feel about things like that in general. And it's not just about sexual abuse, by the way, but only other things, dramatic things and traumatic things that happen in your life.
You're listening to Nighttime Talk with Niall Boylan.
With Recruit.ie. Download our job search app today. Search for Recruit.ie in your smartphone app store.
Ireland's classic hits radio.
All right, let's go to one of our own researchers here and producer, Amanda. And Amanda joins us. Amanda, hi.
Hello.
Now, the reason I wanted to talk to you was because you have a story in relation to your own experiences in a job, was it, that you had at one stage?
Yeah, so I was essentially a stenographer, I guess, in the criminal courts, and I would sit in on cases of sexual abuse, rape, that kind of thing. And just from sitting in on it and having first-hand experience, I understand now why people don't come forward, to be honest.
I could imagine what that must be like, because you have to listen to the gory details, so to speak, and the evidence being given. I suppose the victim in this case, in most cases, would be the state's defence or the state's prosecution witness.
Yeah.
So you have to listen to from start to finish, and of course they make them go into real detail as to what happened on the night of the day in question.
Yeah.
So that must be really difficult to be in a courtroom all the time listening to that.
It is, I guess, and you can't, like, I know the other people in the courtrooms, like, they zone out for most of it because they don't have to really pay that close attention, whereas I did, because I was obviously recording it and taking notes and stuff, so I had to pay attention. So yeah, it was, I guess, it was hard to
do you
listen
think
to.
you can become, because I know from doing this job over the last 30 years, I've spoken to rape victims, I've spoken to victims whose family members were murdered and have been witnesses. I've spoken to people who were abused, bullied, people who have gone through the most horrendous situations in their lives. And I find that although I have empathy, absolutely, and I have a great passion for listening to people's stories, I do find it at a point when you listen to it enough, you do become a little bit desensitized to it.
Oh, you do, 100%. 100% you become so desensitized. Like, it just doesn't faze you after a while, which sounds terrible. But it just doesn't. It doesn't affect you the way it would at the beginning.
And do you think that people who work within those types of jobs is there counselling available for people who work in those types of jobs?
Yeah, so anybody who would work there would be offered free counselling as part of their job. Like, if you wanted to avail of it, you could definitely have it.
And at the jury, for example, in a high profile case where you would have, I suppose really, evidence coming out, like the Graham Dwyer case, that would have been quite traumatic for the jury, even because some of the details that came out that were quite horrific. Would they be offered counselling as well?
I'm actually not too sure about the jury. I'm not too sure. I sat in on I don't know whether you remember Deirdre Morley.
Yes, I do,
who was convicted. Yeah, I think it was not guilty on reason of insanity, I think it was.
Yes, that's right.
If I remember right, but I sat in on that and it was horrendous what the jury had to listen to. But I actually don't think they're offered counselling.
Yeah.
I don't think they are.
In relation to your own sense of safety, I suppose, I mean, do you feel that you're kind of safe in those situations?
Being in the room?
Well, no, not being in the room. I suppose your own sense of safety as a woman. After you've listened to the experiences of other women, because of course you're hearing the worst side of society.
Oh yeah, like
do you understand what I'm saying? On a daily basis,
I was terrified going anywhere. I wouldn't go for a walk on my own. I wouldn't. Anytime I was on my own, I'd be looking behind me. I was terrified for months after.
Because on a daily basis you're listening to the worst part of society.
Yeah, and you realise how often it happens.
But see, yes, I know it happens a lot.
Yeah,
but you're hearing the times it happens. Most people don't hear that. And it is only a small percentage of the population, of course, who are perpetrators or even victims of crimes like this. So, realistically, the world is a reasonably safe place. Because if we all sat in those courtrooms on a daily basis, we'd probably all be afraid to leave the house.
Yeah, that's true. Definitely.
And do the perpetrators, because you would have seen the perpetrators, do they show empathy? Do they seem sorry? Do they seem remorseful, generally speaking?
No. Most of the time, they pretty much have no expression, really. And even when they're given their sentence or found out that they're found guilty, they don't react at all. And
when you look at have you ever made eye contact? Have you ever, with perpetrators that
definitely
really horrible crimes? And that must be awkward or really difficult to make eye contact with somebody has committed such a serious crime.
Yeah, sure. Some of them would be on bail. They wouldn't even be in custody, and they'd be like getting into the lift with you after the the day.
Right,
so,
okay.
Or they'd
That's
walk
awkward,
through the park where you're going. Like I'd park in the park around the corner, and they'd be walking through the park as well, and like they'd be around you, or you'd go for a coffee on your break, and they'd be out getting their lunch, and you're just looking at them thinking of. Like, obviously, some of them weren't.
I know that feeling,
like,
because I remember. Do you remember Joe O'Reilly, of course, the famous Irish killer who killed his wife? And I remember he lived in Swords and so did I. And I brought my children over one day to one of these fun places, you know, where they bounce around on, you know, slides and things. And he was there with his kid. Now, he hadn't been charged. He'd been questioned, and everybody knew he did it.
Yeah.
Everybody knew he did it. Even the police, everybody knew he did it. But he was sitting there having a cup of tea right in front of me. He's a big man, he's about 6'2". And I'm looking at him, and he's like, kind of, like just literally 4 or 5 foot away from me. I was sitting at our table just having a cup of tea. And I'm looking at him going, he's a murderer.
I know.
I mean, that to me was shocking. I can only imagine what it's like seeing that every single day.
Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah.
It really is. Because you realise they're just all around us usually. You just don't think it when you're out and about, but when you actually see them face to face, I guess. Yeah.
And finally, just in relation to the legal process itself, and you've been through the legal, well, when I say you've been through the legal process, you see the legal process every single day. If a friend came to you who'd been sexually abused or sexually assaulted or raped, what advice would you give her, knowing, you know, what you know about the legal process?
As a person and as a woman, I'd want them to have justice, but having seen the process of what they have to go through for the sentencing isn't what they can give isn't great either, and that's not down to individual judges or anything. I don't think it's down to what they're actually allowed to give.
The limits.
It's not. Yeah, it's not enough. And when you are exposed to sexual abuse or you're raped, that's a life sentence for you. You have to live with that for the rest of your life. But they could get 4 or 5 years. It's like a slap on the wrist kind of thing, you know. So I don't know.
And when you went to court, you have to go through the whole thing all over again. It's
Yeah.
like it all happening again, really,
yeah,
isn't it?
it's a tough one. It is a
Yeah.
tough one.
Yeah. Listen, Amanda, thank you very much indeed, and I appreciate
No
you talking about
problem.
that. It's just very interesting.
Real people, real opinions. Real Talk Radio. The multi-award winning Niall Boylan Show.
Ireland's classic hits.
McCarthy Insurance Group, serving the community for over 70 years. For home, farm, motor, life, health and business insurance, log on to mig.ie or free phone 1800 50 11 11. Probably your best call in 2024. Charles McCarthy Insurance is trading as McCarthy Insurance Group, is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.